So, what was your life like during the war?
Well, if I take you back to the 3rd of September 1939, which was a glorious day, the sun was shining, the skies were so blue. I'd just been to Sunday school and I was hurrying home because I wanted to hear Neville Chamberlain to see whether there was going to be peace in our time. My father, who worked for the electricity department, was out with a crowd of the other workforce taking all the bulbs out of the lights, the street lights, because it had got to be total blackout once war was declared. Anyhow, we sat there. There was my mum, Nana, Grandad, my cousin Alma, and of course, eventually Neville Chamberlain came on. And of course, we were at war. We told us we were at war with Germany. Well, I looked out the window. I don't know what I expected, but I just thought once we were at war, there'd be hordes of planes coming over and, oh, bombs would be dropping all round us. But of course, that wasn't the case. Anyhow, Mum had been writing her letter to her mother in London, and she used to post this every week regularly. Dad and I used to go down to the main post office, and she said to me, well, you can go and post this, she said. And then the siren went, and Mother, in her wisdom, said, oh, that's probably just to say that the war's been declared, or they're trying out the sirens. Anyhow, off I trotted, and I took the little boy next door. He was in a pushchair, and his mum had said, well, you can take him for a walk. So off we went. I was going down the main road, and I thought, oh, everything's very quiet, not many people about, I suppose. And I thought to myself, well, everybody must be indoors thinking and talking about this war that we were in. I got quite a way downtown, and all of a sudden, this policeman with his tin hat on shouted out, oi, what are you doing walking down the road without your gas mask? Come on over here and get in under cover. He said, don't you know there's a raid on? Well, I didn't realise there was a raid on. And we went in what was known as the Lagoon Caves, because all the hills around Dover were chalk, and there had been lots of tunnels always, which only had to be opened once war was imminent, and used as air raid shelters, and they were pretty safe once you were in them. Anyhow, in I went. It wasn't long before the all clear went, and I got a right ticking off from the policeman. He said, "Don't you dare come out without your gas mask. You must take your gas mask wherever you go." Well, instead of posting Mum's letter, I went straight back home. And anyhow, that is what I remember when war broke out. Anyhow, that evening, Dad and I went for a walk down the town, and everybody had got their gas masks on, and there were hordes of people out, and everybody was so friendly. Anyhow, as I say, we went to school on the Monday, and everything was quite normal. We just carried on with our lessons. We got to Christmas. It was a terribly cold Christmas, I remember, and we had about a fortnight off school because the heating was all iced up. And we had such a lot of fun, and still, it was what they called the phony war now. Um, it was only, it was fighting in France that was going on. And we heard about the Maginot Line, which was the French line of defence, and the Siegfried Line, which was the German line of defence. And there were lots of songs, patriotic songs. We were going to hang out the washing on the Siegfried Line. And everybody was so friendly. It was quite amazing. And then we had the odd siren go, but nothing seems to happen. Nothing seemed to happen. And then it got, and the news was getting pretty bad. It was about the Germans were pushing us, our British forces. They took over the Maginot Line, and that was when the children, I think it was the June, they parents got the letters at home to say about children being evacuated and how important it was that our children should go to safety. And my mother didn't want me to go at all. In fact, she said I wasn't going to go. And I was heartbroken because all my friends were going, but not me. Well, there were several girls that whose mothers decided to keep them home. Anyhow, the children went, and I heard from my friends in Wales. And then this one evening, we'd been listening to the news, and there was this horrendous crash. The sirens went immediately, and we went over to the air raid shelter, and our air raid warden came round, because each shelter had a warden who supervised you, and he said, oh, they're shelling Dover. Well, unbelievable. A shell, you know, the guns over in Calais could shoot and land shells in Dover. I just found it hard to believe, but of course it was true. So Mother said, right, I can't stand this. We'll go to London. They won't get to London. So off we went to my grandma in London, and I think we'd been there about 4 weeks, and they bombed the docks. Well, we were this side of the river. We lived in Dulwich, and so really we weren't that far from the docks. And that night, when the darkness came, you could see the flares and the fires that were happening in the dock area of London. Well, Mum also suddenly realised she couldn't stay in London. My mum wasn't very well at the time, really. In fact, she was quite a sick lady. And Mother knew a lady who'd been evacuated, who she corresponded with, and she wrote to this lady, and we ended up in Wales. And that was when my real evacuation began for me. And we got a nice billet, and we were living not far from my school that had been evacuated. So I was sent off to rejoin my school. I was quite disappointed. I thought I'd finished with school. And I got there, and they seemed so pleased to see me. And the headmistress said, you're just in time to go in for the Folkestone Tech Scholarship. And I thought, oh, I don't want to go to the Folkestone Tech. But needless to say, they crammed an awful lot of knowledge in my head. I had to go in for it, and of course I passed. So Mother said she was going to come home to Dover because she was missing my dear old dad, and she was missing her own home. So I was sent off to another village in Wales, which was called Treharris, and I was billeted to a very lovely lady and her husband. He was a teacher in the truant school, and there was the son and the daughter living at home then, and 2 other evacuees. I met another girl that was going to the Folkestone Tech on the Sunday evening, and we struck up a friendship straight away, and that friendship lasted until my friend died about 3 years ago. And we settled in there, and the bombing of London was horrendous, and where we were in between mountains and that, we didn't see anything much. We had a few fire bombs dropped on the mountainside. The nearest the war got to us was Swansea, and not even Newport, but Swansea and Cardiff were blitzed. Anyhow, my schooling went on. I was there for 2 years. I'd already been in Wales for a year. I used to go home every holiday, and of course when I came home, the shells were still falling, the bombs were still falling. My mother was quite ill by now, and after I'd been evacuated for a year, she was taken into hospital, and sadly she passed away. I still carried on going to, being evacuated, and I finished my schooling at the age of 16, came home and got a job with the gas company in Dover. And that is when I came to be, living in Dover under shell fire and bombing. And we still tried to live a reasonably normal life, which we did. We used to go dancing, we used to go for walks, we used to like to walk into the country away from the area. You used to feel safe when you were out at a place called Temple Ewell, which is just outside Dover. And we used to feel quite safe out there. And then I joined a youth club, and they had another little cottage out at a place called Barham, which we used to go out to sometimes for the weekend. And everybody was so very friendly. And of course there were lots of caves in Dover where people used to go and shelter. And as I say, my dad had always said to me, if it's got your name on it, it'll get you. And I used to think of all these things coming over with my name tag on it, but as luck would have it, nothing got me. But it nearly did. I was on my way back from lunch one day, and we'd spent most of the time down the air raid shelter, and of course I couldn't take my work down the shelter with me. And so and on the way back from lunch, I met one of my friends and stood talking to him, and we both suddenly decided we'd better get cracking because we were so behind with our work. And I just walked down and round the corner, got into the office, and this blast nearly blew me off my feet. And I can always remember the old storeman there said, don't panic, don't panic. Well, I wasn't panicking. It was all, I suppose, a big adventure. It's not the sort of adventure I would advise you to take. But we went down the air raid shelter, and it appeared that 3 shells had fallen where my friend and I had been standing chatting. And of course, if we'd been there, I wouldn't be sitting here telling you this story. But when the shells fell, you heard them, they made such a crack. But my dad had served in the First World War, and he said to me, if a bomb falls near you, you don't hear it coming, and you don't hear a big crack, you sort of hear a rush of air. Oh, funny enough, I didn't hear a big crack when the shell fell because it was so near. It was a big rush of air that nearly blew me in through the door. So, and another thing my dad told me, if ever there was a gas attack, wet your sock somehow and put it over your nose and mouth, and the gas won't affect you. I said, what if there's no water? So he said, well, use your imagination. So I'll leave you to use your imagination. And so, as I say, we got over that. And we had loads of troops in Dover. There were the Yanks, the Canadians, the Norwegians, the French, the Italians. Even they were in prison camps just outside of Dover because Italy was on Germany's side. This went on, and then of course there were the D-Day landings, which we followed avidly. My dad had a big map on the wall, and we used to put the flags in where how far we were advancing and that. And of course, as you know the story, we pushed the Germans back eventually. And as I say, in the September, when when the Canadians were getting towards Calais to capture their guns, they were just throwing shells at us all the time, and it was very sad. There were people, especially an old gentleman who we named Admiral Bembo. He sat at the entrance of the caves, only going home to change his clothes and have his meals, etc. And he was sitting outside the caves this one night, and these crowds of people came rushing in, and there was a lady with her twin daughters and her other daughter, and she was puffed out, so she sat down beside Admiral Bembo with the one twin, and her other daughter and the other twin went in, and lo and behold, the entrance to the cave had a direct hit, and Admiral Bembo and this lady and her twin were sadly killed. And another sad story, there was a Salvation Army gentleman, I think he was, I can't think of his name, but he was always the first person on the scene when there had been a bomb fall or any damage. He was Major Aspinall, that's right, that was his name. And he used to take his canteen along, and he was always there with a cup of tea and what he called his wads, which were currant cakes. And wonderful man, never shirked his duty. Sadly, in that last lot of shelling, he was killed, which, well, it was such a tragedy. And one of the worst tragedies, I think, that I heard, and one of my aunts was a nurse in London, and she had this family brought in, all dead, but they weren't damaged in any way whatsoever, but they'd sat in their basement in comparative safety, and the house above them had been blitzed and razed to the ground almost, but the cellar was intact. But they died because the gas had leaked in and killed them that way. Also, another tragedy, there was a family that lived in the street in Dover that had gone to the air raid shelter. The air raid shelter got a direct hit and their home was perfect. Anyhow, when the Canadians captured the guns at here comes Sue, at Calais, when they captured the guns at Calais, it was announced over the tannoy that the guns had been captured, and well, there was such great rejoicing in Dover, it was almost like the end of the war. We went out, we felt safe, you know, for once. Anyhow, that didn't last very long, because the air raid warning went one night, and my dad and I got up, went out, and lo and behold, there was this what looked like a plane going over with its lights on, and Dad said to me, "Oh, that pilot's brave, isn't he?" And all of a sudden it stopped and landed and blew everything to smithereens. It was a flying bomb. That was the first one we saw. But they really bypassed Dover. They wanted to get to London, you see. But our fighter pilots used to come and try and shoot them down before they got there. Anyhow, that was that. And then more horrendous was the B2s. They were like the shells. They were shot over from France or Germany, I think it was then, and landed on London. Nobody knew when they were coming. I think if Hitler had had them at the beginning of the war, I dread to think what would have happened. I think he might have stood a better chance of winning it. Just my thoughts. But then really we realised by then that the war was hopefully beginning to come to an end, not in Japan, mind you, but it did, of course, eventually, and war, and the day of victory was declared. What a wonderful day it was. Oh, there was just dancing in the streets, pianos were brought out into the streets, the music was playing, people were drinking. So that's my story of the war.